Tommy Kissinger with Tommy's Truth Talk. Thank you so very much for joining us again. And we're going to be continuing to go through our series, The Gospel of God, God's Plan for the Ages. This is going to be the milk of the word number 8. And we are touching on this topic, the resurrection of the dead. This will be the resurrection of the dead, number 1. In the previous teaching, we touched on the case for the resurrection of Jesus himself. And so now we build on top of that and we talk about the resurrection of the dead in general. And Paul speaks of this in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It is spoken of in many other places in the scriptures. And we find it listed out in the list of the milk of the word in Hebrews chapter 6, where the writer says the resurrection of the dead. And I want to make note of, as we go through this teaching here, the resurrection of the dead, we will be leaning heavily on the writings of Dr. Stephen Jones. I'll be reading many quotes and passages from his writings, and you can find all of his writings available at godskingdomministries.org. That's godskingdomministries.org. His writings are my favorite out there today, especially pertaining to the ultimate restoration of all things. He is an expert on this and many other topics pertaining to this. So let's get on into this. We're talking about the resurrection of the dead. And before we get into that, by the way, if you wouldn't mind hitting that thumbs up button, the like button. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please consider doing so. So here we go. There will be a resurrection at the end of the age. The Pharisees believed that there would be a resurrection at the end of the age. A proof text for this is Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. Now, reading through this here, I'm reading through the Young's literal translation, so it's a little bit wordy. But Daniel 12, verses 1 through 2. And at that time, Michael stands up, the great head, who is standing up for the sons of thy people. And there has been a time of distress, such as has not been since there has been a nation till that time. And at that time do the people escape, everyone who is found written in the book. And the multitude of those sleeping in the dust of the ground do awake, some to life age during, and some to reproaches, to abhorrence age during. So you see some that rise to life, the life of the ages, and you see some that arise to reproaches or judgment age during. So Acts 23:8. For the Sadducees say there is no resurrection, nor an angel, nor a spirit, but the Pharisees acknowledge them all. So in the days of Jesus, you had these competing religious groups. One was the Pharisees and the other was the Sadducees. The Pharisees believed in the resurrection, and the Sadducees said there was no resurrection. So anytime that the Sadducees came upon the scene, they were announced as saying, and here come the Sadducees who say there is no resurrection. They did not believe in a resurrection, bodily resurrection. The Christians sided with the Pharisees because the resurrection of Jesus Christ is central to Christianity itself. So Jesus spoke of the resurrection, and we find this in John 5, verses 28 and 29. Jesus says, do not be amazed at this, for a time is coming when all who are in the tombs will hear his voice and will come out. Those who did the good deeds to a resurrection of life, those who committed the bad deeds to a resurrection of judgment. So we see there is a general resurrection coming that is going to include all those who are in the graves. And it is a resurrection to life for some and a resurrection of judgment for others. That is the second general resurrection. So, Jesus spoke of it. You have the resurrection of life and the resurrection of judgment. Jesus was referring back to Daniel chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. So Paul on the matter in Acts 24, verses 14 through 15. Paul says, "But I confess this to you, that in accordance with the way which they call a sect, I do serve the God of our fathers, believing everything that is in accordance with the law and is written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men cherish themselves, that there shall certainly be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked." Wow. Paul said he had hope in God that there would be a resurrection. Not only that, but that this resurrection would include the righteous and the wicked. Paul had hope that the wicked would be raised from the dead. Very interesting. Why? Because he knew that then the wicked would go into judgment, and that the judgment would be for correction. So, Paul speaks on this matter, the resurrection of the righteous and the resurrection of the wicked. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verses 15 through 18. Two individuals, Hymenaeus and Philetus, men who have gone astray from the truth, saying the resurrection has already taken place, and they upset the faith of some. So apparently in Paul's day, there were these two men named Hymenaeus and Philetus. They were going around saying the resurrection has already happened. There's not going to be a resurrection. It's already taking place. They were destroying the faith of some who were believing in the resurrection to come. Paul took issue with that in his day and said that they were incorrect. So they attempted to take Matthew chapter 27, verses 50 through 53 to mean that there would be no resurrection at the end of the age, which view is incorrect. There was a resurrection spoken of in Matthew chapter 27, verses 50 through 53, but this resurrection was limited to saints only right after the resurrection of Jesus, and did not include those who would be raised in disgrace and contempt and judgment. Hence, it did not fulfill the prophecy in Daniel 12:2. The resurrection is yet to come. Now, here's an interesting point that we want to introduce, is that the Bible, not only does it speak of the resurrection of the dead, but it speaks of two resurrections, okay? So let's get into these. Revelation chapter 20, verses 4 through 6. Then I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was given to them. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded because of their testimony of Jesus, and because of the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or his image, and had not received the mark on their foreheads and on their hands. And they came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Let me say it again. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who has a part in the first resurrection. Over these, the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years. For many years, I read the scriptures and never even paid any attention to that until that was brought to my attention. Many people are not even taught about the resurrection of the dead, let alone that there's going to be a first resurrection and then a second general resurrection. So that outlines it right there. Revelation chapter 20, verses 4 through 6. This is the first resurrection. Okay? And it says that the rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. So, now let's touch on the second general resurrection. Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 13. Then I saw a great white throne and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and the books were opened, and another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged from those things which were written in the books according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to their deeds. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. So, that outlines the first resurrection and the second resurrection. Very interesting. We're going to use this as an introduction to the two resurrections, which pertain to the resurrection of the dead. Remember, Paul established in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that Jesus was raised from the dead. And then he said, how are there some among you who say there is no resurrection of the dead? If there's no resurrection of the dead in general, then Jesus was not raised from the dead. And if Jesus was not raised from the dead, we're still in our sins. We might as well eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And all of this is a delusion, and there's no salvation and no justification by faith. But as we mentioned in that previous teaching, Jesus is risen from the dead. Okay, but now we get into what that means for the rest of us. You see, because there was no wasted activity with Jesus. My question for all of us would be, is why did God raise Jesus from the dead? Okay, why couldn't Jesus just die on the cross and then that be our salvation, that he would just say, hey, I died for the sin of the world, and then just send word from the spirit realm in a vision back to his followers and say, I'm alive in the spirit, and now just go tell everyone I'm alive in the spirit. No, Jesus had to rise from the dead. Okay, when Jesus rose from the dead, and then he spoke to his followers and he said, hey, I have all power in heaven and in earth. He could legally say that now, because he was risen from the dead. Not only did he conquer in the spirit realm, but he had conquered in the earth realm by coming back with an immortal body that could no longer die. He conquered death for us and as us, and now he was the firstborn. He was the seed that would bring forth many in his likeness. So, the very fact that Jesus rose from the dead guarantees and tells us that there's going to be a resurrection of the dead, a bodily resurrection of the dead in general, because there was no wasted activity with Jesus. Jesus would not rise from the dead if it did not signify that we had to rise from the dead also. And we have to see that that is part of our salvation process. Salvation is just not justification by faith, but it's also the sanctification of the soul, and it's also ultimately the redemption of our body, the glorification of our body to receive a glorified body. So that's what all this signifies. And now we have introduced this idea that there's going to be a first resurrection, and those people are going to rule and reign with Jesus Christ for 1,000 years. They're going to rise before the rest of the dead. The rest of the dead live not again until the 1,000 years were finished. And then at the end of that, there is the second general resurrection. Those that have done good to the resurrection of life, those that have done evil to the resurrection of judgment, or the second death, which is the lake of fire. And then we will begin to get into that and explain all those things in the teachings to follow next.